Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on what section you're in. So excited to start our read aloud this morning of Two Roads by Joseph Bruchac. So, hopefully, in our exercise at the beginning of class, we were able to get a little bit of background as to what era we're talking about during the Great Depression and during the continued oppression and marginalization of Indigenous peoples. So, as we begin to read this book, keep that background knowledge in mind, and we are going to learn a little bit more about our main characters and what journey they are on. So, if you're reading online, go ahead and open to page 7. Give you a moment to open that. It's in the Two Roads Reading Resources in Classroom, or page 7 in your physical book. I'll also be putting the pages on our screen like this, so you can see the cover. This is part 1, On the Road, March 1932. So we'll start on page 7, chapter 1, Keeping Up. And just a note as we read this chapter, the first few chapters of the book will only be reading excerpts, so we won't be reading the entire chapter. This is just to save time, so you're welcome to read the entire chapter if you'd like to, but our questions and our analysis of the text will only be through an excerpt of chapter 1. So I will let you know. You can also see on the page where I wrote little brackets for you to see which part of the text we will be focusing on. Chapter 1, Keeping Up. The red road stretches out before us, a long ribbon of light. Keep up, Cal. I'm the right size for my age, which is 12, this being 1932 and the year of our Lord. I can run as fast as the Dickens, but when it comes to marching, I always fall behind. Despite Pop's limp, he always gets a few steps ahead of me. I cannot help but sigh. Pop doesn't hear that, though he can still catch the songs of the birds in the trees above us, like the red bird he pointed out a mile back. Real low noises escape his ears. It has been that way since the 6th of June in 18, when he was partially deafened from the booming of the big guns. We keep marching along. I'm doing a better job now of keeping up. I don't mind walking like this, mile after mile, just as long as it doesn't start my father remembering. Pop looks up at the sun. It was hot like this that day. It was about this time, he says. Exactly 3:45 p.m. There's a faraway look on his face now. He's telling the story to himself, mostly unaware of me listening. Over the top and take that wood, General Hartford orders us. And then the whistle blares. So over the top we go. Every one of us as green as grass. It's the place where Pop always pauses. Sometimes we'll walk as much as a mile before he says more. And then the devil's paintbrushes opened up and down we went like a wheat field being mowed. Another silence as another mile passes. No, he says, not like wheat or rye. Mown grass does not bleed or make the ground so slippery you can't hardly stand. He pauses, shakes his head as if trying to wake up from a bad dream. Then he starts walking again. That faraway look is gone from his face. I'm not even sure he knew what that look was there. He's finished that story for now, leaving it behind. So that is where we'll pause for our first stop and jot. Go ahead and make an inference in your Nearpod. Where do we think Pop is in this story that he is telling? He's telling us a story. Look back in the text at your evidence. Where is Pop and what is he describing? All right, you may have made an inference that Pop was fighting in the war. So we see some text evidence that shows us that inference on page 7. Cal, our narrator, says, it has been that way since the 6th of June in 18, that is 1918, when he was partially deafened by the booming of the big guns. So that was in World War I. Pop was at war. We also have some text evidence at the bottom of page 7 when he says General Hartford. We know that general is a military title. And then toward the end of that excerpt, we have some text evidence mentioning blood that shows that Pop was involved in some type of violent war scene. So let's keep reading halfway down page 9, right here where our bracket is. I'm so lost in that vision of France I've never really seen that I've been in a daze, not even seeing my feet crunching the red roadside gravel. I run my hands back through my long hair, waking myself back up to the real world. Yes, sir, I say. Present and accounted for, sir. That makes Pop chuckle. It's not hard for me to amuse Pop, unless he is in one of his black moods. Then nothing will bring the light of a smile to his sun-brown face, even though I have to try. I take care of you, you take care of me. That's the deal, as Pop puts it. All we have is each other. So we're going to continue reading on page 10, near the bottom of the page. Remember, we're just reading an excerpt, not the entire chapter. You're welcome to go back on your own time and read the entire chapter. So we're halfway down page 10. I feel the weight of a few books like I do own in my pack. Mrs. Hall, who was my 6th grade teacher, gave them to me when the school closed. She made sure every one of the few boys and girls still left when it shut down got 1 or 2 books. Me, being the one who read the most, I got 3. Here, Cal, she said, I know you'll treasure these. And she was right about that. I'd buy more books if I had the money and a place to keep them other than my pack. One day, probably years down the road, when Pop and I have a place of our own again, as Pop promises we will, I'm going to have a whole shelf of books in my room. Maybe 2. Page 11. But even without school, I have kept on learning. Pop knows a lot. Though he doesn't often share what he writes, he keeps a sort of journal, an old half-used ledger book that he was able to buy for a nickel from a storekeeper we did some odd jobs for. Now and then, he'll pull out this half pencil he keeps in his shirt pocket to write down his thoughts as he takes note of things. Maybe the weather, or where we found a good place to camp, or the name of some farmer who treated us friendly-like. Some of the other things he writes down, as he remembers such things that his own parents taught him, are about plants. He has read to me from that journal the names of all sorts of things and how they might be used, like how chewing green willow bark cures a headache, or how tea made from pine needles is good for a cough. So from this excerpt, go ahead and make another inference using our text evidence. What type of student is Cal? So Cal, our main character, our narrator, what type of student is he? So you may have looked at the text evidence on page 10 that describes Mrs. Hall, my 6th grade teacher, gave me these books when the school closed. Me, being the one who read the most, I got 3. Toward the bottom of page 10, he describes, I'd buy more books if I had the money and a place to keep them other than my pack. One day, probably years down the road, when Pop and I have a place of our own again, I'm going to have a whole shelf of books in my room, maybe 2. So that evidence shows that he is an avid reader. He loves to learn through reading books. The top of page 11, he gives us more evidence. Even without school, I've kept on learning. So he doesn't need school to keep learning. He learns from people around him. So based on that evidence, we could say Cal is curious. He's hardworking. He learns from those around him and the experience he has around him. And we could say he is an avid reader. That's how we would describe Cal as a student. Let's go ahead and keep reading on page 12. We're about halfway down page 12. Where all you boys think you're a-headin'? That rough, unfriendly voice jolts me out of that future to an unpleasant present. A big man on an equally big white horse is blocking the road in front of us. There's a double-barrel shotgun cradled loose over his left arm, half pointed our way. The man's square face is as red as his hair. His mouth is set hard. Morning, Captain, Pop says, snapping a salute. His voice is friendly and polite. I'm glad of that. When my father's voice is otherwise, things may not turn out so well. Pop's stance is relaxed and easy, not like a coiled spring. Pop drops his hand to untie his kerchief and unbutton the top of his shirt. Then he wipes his neck with that kerchief. His doing so makes that man up on his horse relax some. I know why. He's caught sight, as Pop intended, of the slightly paler skin of my father's neck and chest. Both Pop and I are dark, and we tan fast. We become brown as berries from living out as we have done since losing the house and farm where the bank failed. That man on his high horse may have been taking us for Negroes. We are in the South. Here in the South, though I have never understood why, those whose great-grandparents come from the dark continent are not treated fair. So here we got the beginning of Cal describing his skin tone. As you remember from the beginning of this lesson, we talked about respectful language that we use when describing individuals' racial or ethnic background. So I just want to flag that for you guys, that using the N-word in this context is describing from the 1930s, a word that was acceptable then to use, but now we know it is not, so we will not use it in our own discussions, but that is just something that I wanted to flag for you guys. All right, so we're on page 14. Toward the bottom, see our next bracket where we'll be picking up. He gestures down the road with 3 outstretched fingers. Third house on your left, half mile up. My place. Wife's there. Rose. Tell her Red sent you. He claps his palm on his chest, making a hollow thump, loud as a drum. Red Campbell. She'll give you dinner. Boy of yourn looks hungry. Thank you, Pop says, drawing himself up a bit. But we, my boy and me, we would like to work for what's offered. Might you need some wood split or a fence mended? Red Campbell nods as he clears his throat again. That is how you folks be, right? Different from the beggars or bums looking for handouts. We're hobos, sir, I say, speaking up for the first time. It surprises me almost as much as it does Pop, who looks at me with one eyebrow raised. We have an ethical code. Pop raises that eyebrow a little higher. Staying silent most of the time is my nature, but when I do start talking, especially about our way of life, I sometimes do go on a bit. Right now, Pop is wondering if I'm about to begin spouting that ethical code which he used to read me from his journal, but which I now know by heart. Starting off with, decide your own life. Do not let another person run or rule you. So that was the beginning of our new book, Chapter 1. We read some excerpts. Using that text, using your understanding based on the inferences we made on Cal and Pop, go ahead and write a gist statement for that chapter of 2 Roads. So what did we mostly learn in this chapter? What events did we unfold? And how has that changed our understanding of our main characters, Cal and Pop? Take a few moments to write about 1 to 2 sentences for your gist statement. After that, and you've completed your async work for Monday, you are good to go.